Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of the show. We've got Martin Popoff in the house here on this Wednesday morning. Good morning, Martin.
Morning there, Pete.
So today we've got a pretty cool topic for you that, as we just discussed like 5 seconds ago, we might actually be able to get a second episode out of this one if you really like it. So this is all about those great last albums from bands. So pretty notable bands who put out this album and then that was it. No more. All right. They retired. Folks died. It broke up. Whatever the reason, this was the final album and we've yet to see anything from them and probably won't see anything from them ever again. So as we started looking into this, we found out that there's actually some pretty good ones out there. So we've each put together 5 here for you today. And I'm going to have Martin kick us off with his first choice.
Yes. All right. So I don't know how considerably notable this band was. They didn't make a lot of music, but it is this band Derringer with these 2 albums, which is a follow-up to Sweet Evil, which is high on my wall and I can't bring down, and then it was followed up by these 2 albums. So there you go, my double vinyl copies of Derringer. So I held up Guitars and Women because that's a Rick Derringer album, right? So Derringer themselves only made the Derringer album. And they made Sweet Evil, which is kind of a classic, sounds a lot like an Aerosmith album, sitting by the pool and all that. They had a live album, which is, a few older tracks because Rick Derringer had a previous solo career as well. But they only made 3 studio albums, and this was the last one. If I Weren't So Romantic, I'd Shoot You, kind of a mouthful of a title, kind of like a Meatloaf title, right? But the thing with Derringer, so Sweet Evil is kind of like the one that your head is telling you has got to be your favorite album. But really, I would say this one is my favorite Derringer album. I think it's a great last album. The thing with the band, though, it is a little bit of a compromised lineup as well because Vinny Appice was gone. Danny Johnson was gone. So you're now left with Rick Derringer, Kenny Aronson, the great bass player who's been in a lot of situations, HSAS as well, right? And Myron Grombacher, who is famed for being the drummer for Pat Benatar, right? But love this record. I find it so fun and playful and interesting to listen to. It's produced by Mike Chapman, so that might give you a little idea. He's known for Sweet and Mud and Blondie and all that, so he's kind of like a hitsy sort of guy. And all these songs are just kind of like punchy and somewhat heavy. I mean, it ends really strong with Rockarola, Attitude, and Monomania, which are all, they're a little comedic. But well produced and a lot of fun. It's got Warren Zevon's Lawyers, Guns, and Money is on here. Easy Action's a cool kind of poppy, semi-heavy one. It Ain't Funny is a little poppy and heavy. It's kind of like a power pop album, whereas Sweet Evil was more of like an Aerosmith album, right?
Yeah.
Aerosmith, Ram Jam, Ted Nugent sort of thing. So yeah, I think this is a great last album. A lot of songs on it. Looks like 11 songs on it. So all just short, to the point. If I Weren't So Romantic was a great ballad, Midnight Road. So, but I do feel like even though this one is called a Rick Derringer album, it kind of sounds pretty similar to that last Derringer album. And the cool thing about this one, of course, is it's the 2 heaviest songs Rick Derringer or Derringer probably ever did are on this album, and they're both written by Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick. It's Need a Little Girl Like Just Like You and It Must Be Love. 2 barnstorming metal tracks on this record, but otherwise it sounds quite utilitarian and fun and cheerful as this great Derringer album. So there you go. That's my number 5.
Martin, what year was that album again?
The Derringer is 78, and then the Guitars and Women is 79. Sweet Evil is 77.
Okay, so that's right when Danny and Vinny went and formed Axis then, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, cool. All right, so I'm going to do mine kind of chronologically here, I guess. We're going to start from way back and kind of move forward. So this, my first choice is not the last album the band recorded, but it's the last album that was released from them. So officially it's their final statement. And although most people cite the album that came out before it as their big classic and probably, their big final moment, they went into the studio, released a new album. This is still technically their last album, and it's still technically really damn good. We're talking about the Beatles' Let It Be. Okay, of course, Abbey Road is the other album that I'm talking about. That's the last album that they would record together. This was made up of, stuff that they had laying around, put together, whatever. But this is still a really, really good album, I think. And for a way for this historic band to kind of go out on, not too bad. Would it have been even better if they went out on Abbey Road, which is probably the way it should have been? I mean, then all of a sudden that's like historic proportions there. But man, you got Let It Be and I Me Mine on here, Across the Universe, I've Got a Feeling. So many good tracks. And I think it's almost, the album in a way is almost kind of cold because you already know and have the feeling that this band is basically imploded from the seams when the album came out. But as a kind of last statement from this great band, I still think it's one of the best ever. And I still listen to this quite a bit to this day. And that's my first choice for today.
Yeah, and it did get a little bit of abuse at the time because it is one of those bad vibes sort of situation. You know about the bad vibes, right?
Yeah,
And it's shocking that the Beatles would break up so soon. They made a lot of music, but they weren't together a long time, especially by later standards, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but you're right. I think at the time, this was, they're going to go out with that. But I think over time, Tom has been pretty gentle, I think, to Let It Be, because there's a handful of tracks on here that are just legendary songs. And I think it's quite good. I never kind of got the hate for it, so to speak, but I dig it.
All right, cool. All right. So my next choice is Max Webster with Universal Juveniles. I'm wearing my Max Webster shirt.
I saw that. Yeah.
So it is their last album. They only made, what is it? Five albums, 1, 2, 3, 5 albums, I think, with one live album in there. This has this distinction of also being their heaviest album. It's a pretty rockin' record. Kim Mitchell is one of my favorite guitarists of all time. I always cite him along with Brian May and Billy Gibbons. And Pi Dubois is one of my favorite lyricists of all time. He's not in the band. He's just like a lyricist, like Grateful Dead has outside lyricists, right? Cream, right? But he writes every single lyric on this album, which is pretty incredible. It's got 10 tracks on it. Most of them are pretty heavy by Max Webster standards. It's produced by Jack Richardson. It's got one of these sort of puffy, stuffy 70s perfect production sounds. In the same manner that I love the production of Pat Travers' Heat in the Streets, but Pat Travers himself always complains about it. This sounds a bit like this, that Jack Richardson doesn't generally produce like this or even this good, but I think it sounds really, really good. A lot of bass and treble, full spectrum, but kind of weirdly polite, but it's heavy and powerful. And quirky band, really cool band, Canadian. I consider them my favorite Canadian band of all time. The other amazing thing about this record is it's got Battle Scar on it, and Battle Scar is a big. Everybody got together from the Max Webster band and Rush and recorded that whole song together all in one room. It's a big, long, epic. It's heavy, it's slow, and everybody takes their part, playing on this really cool track. So, possibly not my favorite Max Webster album of them all, although, like I say, it is the heaviest. But this is about best last albums. Best meaning not best by the band, but just really good last albums by bands, right? I think it's a really cool album. My favorite is probably the lightest, which is A Million Vacations, the one just before this. So they went from their lightest album to their heaviest album to close out their career. So yeah, Max Webster.
Who don't have a bad album, in my opinion.
Exactly. I agree.
I think their catalog is really strong. And I think, and you and I have talked about this many times in the past, one of the most underrated bands ever.
Yeah.
That's a great choice. Cool. Really good album. I like that album a lot. It's also not my favorite, but it's up there. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to go to 1983. So right just after Martin's choice here for a band that going through a lot of problems at the time. However, they brought a new guitar player in. So I'm talking about Thin Lizzy, Thunder and Lightning. So of course, the Snowy White era had ended. In comes the new hotshot guitar player, John Sykes, fresh from Tigers of Pantang. And all of a sudden, Thin Lizzy releases, and Phil's got all sorts of drug problems and what have you at the time. And, Scott and, whatever. but they go and they put out arguably the heaviest album of their career. And, I remember buying this album when it first came out, and, you look at it and you see that hand coming out of the earth with this metallic spiked glove, and something's going on here. And as soon as you put the album on, you're like, whoa, that's Thin Lizzy almost doing heavy metal, right? Thin Lizzy were always a great hard rock band, but would you ever call anything they did heavy metal up until this point? And I know some longtime Thin Lizzy fans don't like this album because it's so heavy and because it kind of changed direction and went that way, whereas others embraced it because it was so heavy. And here we're talking about just after the big rise of the new wave of British heavy metal, right? So it kind of fit right in. But Sykes playing a House of Fire on here and proving, that he was everything he claimed to be. The title track, I mean, just top to bottom, really, really good songs. Cold Sweat, they played on FM rock radio here in New York at the time. This is the one, The Sun Goes Down, Holy War, Heart Attack, Baby Please Don't Go. A lot of really fun songs. But Phil was kind of winding down, sadly, in his life by this time. And, he had basically felt the band had kind of run its course. He was exhausted. The drugs were taking their toll. So this would be it. They go out and do the big tour in support of it. And before you know it, Sykes is off to Whitesnake. Phil kind of messes around and solo stuff and Grand Slam, and then you blink and he's gone, and the rest is history. But as final statements for bands go, this is a dynamite album. Maybe if you don't appreciate the heaviness of it because you like, the older, more melodic stuff, I get that, but I still think this is a cracking album and a great way to go out, and one of the great kind of hard rock final releases from a band ever.
Yeah, sure left you with something to talk about, right? And our band actually played Bad Habits off that album, and I think we did Cold Sweat off that album as well. That record is one that I've been talking to people about. Clash Cut the Crap and how it would be nice to see that completely re-recorded or whatever. This is an album that I would love to hear what this album sounds like, where like if you took away the parts, kept all the songs the way they are, kept the vocals the way they are, and gave it a plush Renegade expensive pillowy sound of kind of production and performance on it, to see what that would sound like. Because everybody does more or less complain about the production. It's an uncharacteristic Chris Tangerides production sound. He doesn't usually sound like that, but it's almost to Black Sabbath Born Again levels in some respects, right? It's really harsh. Yeah, a great last album for sure. Yeah. Okay, so my next choice is a little bit of an oddball one here. It is Husky Dew from Minneapolis with this one. And I thought this was a pretty cool choice because this is a band that didn't make a lot of records, and they ended their career on a double album, which is kind of cool, right?
I'll figure.
Yeah, so this is one of the great Minneapolis bands from that Minneapolis scene that gave us the Replacements and Soul Asylum. Love all three of these bands to death. But Husky Dew, so here's some of their earlier stuff. So this is the one just before it. It sounds more or less the same. Here's some earlier ones. This is their earlier double album, which is very noisy and quite unlistenable. This is even more unlistenable. There's one of their live albums. But anyways, when they got to the end of their career, the last New Day Rising is considered one of their classics because it's a good balance between the noise and the poppiness and the melody. But Flip Your Wig, Candy Apple Gray, and Warehouse Songs and Stories, that's the name of this record, double album, are pretty similar in what they do, which is this buzzsaw guitar sound, like a very odd, harsh production sound with really, really steely drum sounds and really, really buzz soundy, almost like Tom Scholz rock box times 10 guitar sounds, but really cool lyrics and good melodies and more or less a wall of sound throughout, a wall of noise throughout. Bob Mould and Greg Norton were fighting about the writing through this band, and also Greg Norton was Grant Hart, drummer, and Bob Mould, guitarist, vocalist. Those two guys split the writing in this band, and this album is the writing split right down the middle. So they were fighting about writing. Bob Mould was fighting about Grant Hart's drug problems at the time. Greg Norton is the bassist in the band. He didn't write at all. He's the guy with the little twirly mustache and went on to be a chef. But the band broke up after this, and we got Sugar from Bob, and they had some success, and they sounded like almost a slightly more polite version of Husker Du. And then there were Bob Mould solo albums, lots and lots of those. And he actually went on to be a script writer for wrestling, believe it or not. He did a lot of that as well at the same time. So yeah, I love this record. I love this band. Just really cool melodies, but heavy at the same time. And my last story is I actually got to interview Grant Hart on the phone. It was one of the worst phone interviews I ever had. It was just hard to get anything out of him. I don't know if he was going through a troubled time or whatever, but this is when we were vetting people for various episodes of Metal Evolution at Banger Films, and we just decided, no, Sam, you are not going to be interviewing this guy. You're not going to spend thousands of dollars to go to Minneapolis to talk to this guy, because you're going to get nothing out of him. It was just getting any kind of information. It was just like short answers, and he sounded like half asleep and all this. It was really, really odd. But and then he died later, right? So that was 2009. He died in 2017, age 56, liver cancer, I believe it was, something like that. Maybe not. Yeah, I think it was. Well, maybe not liver cancer, but it was complications from his long years of drugging. So yeah, a double album to end off a career, Husker Du.
Go figure. Yeah, there was so much buzz about that band for a while, and they never quite hit those heights, I think, that everybody kind of expected.
Yeah, critics' darlings, right?
Yeah. All right, cool. So let's see. I'm going to go fast forward to 1998 now. So this is a band that one of the revolutionary extreme metal bands of all time, and arguably the band that there's a few of them, but one of the bands that put death metal on the map. I'm talking about Death, their final album, Sound of Perseverance from 1998. So, these guys started off in the late 80s as a, pretty crazy Floridian horror themed death metal band, right? And led by Chuck Schuldiner, guitarist and vocalist. Lots of lineup changes. But as the band started to put out a couple records, Chuck became really enamored with complexity and progressiveness in music, and really turned this band into a powerhouse technical progressive death metal band. And, really intricate arrangements and melodic guitar solos, and like I said, a lot of really great players have come and gone through this band, but reached a point like towards the end of the band's career, before of course he got sick with brain cancer and passed away, where he even toned down the growls a bit on this last album. And this album is highly melodic, highly progressive, and there are some days where this is actually my favorite Death album. Okay. There's a couple that's usually vie for the number one spot, but man, just so good. And the guitar riffs and all the different fills and solos that are on here, and the drumming from Richard Christie, which is like off the charts great. I mean, Scavenger, Human Sorrow, Spirit Crusher just absolutely is amazing. A Moment of Clarity, Flesh in the Power It Holds, just top to bottom, a really good example of how melodic and progressive death metal can actually be when a band decides to go that route. Great production, not as kind of in your face assault that some of the earlier albums are, but it's so melodic and it's just really so engaging to listen to. And sadly, this would be the last Death album. Chuck would go on to do one more recording with another band, Control Denied, which was basically kind of like this, but with clean vocals, right? And also really good. And then, of course, we'd lose them. So, Sound of Perseverance from Death.
Yeah, and they absolutely became one of those pioneers, now not of death, but now of progressive death metal, right? And which is a different kind of progressive death metal than the Swedish stuff, but this is more that American experimental, Watchtower cynic kind of thing, right? Yeah. We saw them, or did we see Control Denied? Anyways, one of the earliest metal fests we went to, one of Jack Koshik's things in Milwaukee. the whole Brave Words crew went down there, and we saw them at that, which was really cool. Saw Emperor there for the first time as well.
Oh, wow, cool. Yeah, Emperor's great live.
Yeah, and that might have even been their North American debut. And they were so ticked off because they were missing, I think they were missing their keyboardist or something. So they were just despondent over having to play the gig one member short. Nobody even noticed, right? But of course, I think it was because it was their first time there or whatever. I mean, it sounded great to us, but yeah, they were just depressed, totally depressed backstage because of that, after that show. All right. So my next choice, number 2, and by the way, I guess I went in the order of strength of concept, I suppose, in terms of like getting better, best, or more impactful or whatever. So I went with this is a clear choice for something like best last albums. The Van Halen, A Different Kind of Truth. Nobody expected this. This was so surprising and in a great way. It's so heavy. It's guitars throughout. I think Tattoo apparently is the only song with any synthesizer on it. Anything else you hear that sounds like synthesizers is Eddie trying to sound a little synthesizy, but mostly it's just heavy metal, hard rock riffing, a lot of fast songs. And the whole idea here is, I think, around 7 tracks go back to their origins from 75 to 77. I think one of them, Blood and Fire, is 84, Origins in 84. Eddie has been even said to say in interviews that some of the songs go back to his high school days. And then what David Lee Roth did is he said, no, like we got to really revamp the lyrics. And so he made the lyrics really sort of catchy / annoying David Lee Roth aphorisms and fortune cookie sayings of his crazy life, right? So the lyrics are almost just a little too much David Lee Roth, right? But yeah, it's just a great heavy album, action packed, lot of stuff. A lot of songs on it. Wolfgang is the bassist of the band, but that's fine. Alex is here. Not particularly Brown soundy. The production on this is a little bit conservative by Van Halen standards, but really cool album. And I guess word has it, the idea is Wolfgang was sort of pushing them to dust off and change a bunch of these demo songs that he was hearing. So, and Eddie said basically, this album, this is for us. This is the album kind of for us. We don't care how great commercial it works out, but everybody talked about it. It almost went gold. I think it went gold in Canada. But I would imagine it's probably over gold now. Hard to imagine it not being over gold. But yeah, who expected these guys to come back and be that one band who actually did what all the metalheads kind of want of their bands and come back with so much fire and heaviness? It's very rare that anybody does that. No one expected it to be Van Halen to do that, and they did.
Yeah, that's a great choice. That album is such an ass kicker. I mean, I remember when that came out, I don't think any of us expected it to be that good. And, considering the album that it followed, it's almost like one of the great comebacks in recent memory, right? Because the VH3 album is, by most standards, the worst Van Halen album ever released. So, yeah. And it just amazing riffage and solos on that whole album. I mean, it's just like Eddie Unleashed. So good. So good.
Yeah, I never thought of that. It's the follow-up to 3. Wow, that's
I mean, all those years, right? I mean, how many years? That was a long ass time. Yeah.
It's 2000 to 2007, something like that, right? Or 2012? Yeah, 2012. So, or is it 98 to 2012? Yeah, it's a long time, anyways.
Yeah, it's a long time, and hard to believe it's been that many years since that album came out.
Yeah, I know. Does it feel like 9 years? Wow.
Yeah, I was going to say that was about 3-4 years ago. Wow. Oh, Martin, we're getting old, man. Time is flying by. Holy crap. All right. Speaking of time flying by, I can't believe this is going to be almost 20 years since this came out. It's actually 18. But Allman Brothers band, Hitting the Note from 2003. So this would be the last studio album we would see from this band. Of course, they would continue on after this to play live each and every year. I mean, this band, up until Greg passed away a few years back, were road warriors, basically, toured every year, played multiple nights at the Beacon Theater in New York City. That's the big famous thing they did in the second half of their career all the time. But this would be, sadly, the only studio album we would get to see featuring the guitar tandem of Warren Haynes and Derek Trucks, who, if you've ever had a chance to see these guys live with those two together, pretty mind blowing. And arguably, no, there's no disrespect to Dickie because I love him, but arguably the Haynes Trucks guitar duo, one of the best since the early days of Dickie and Dwayne. And this is a cracking, rocking album from the band. And I remember, like, when this came out, I was so happy to hear this and so into it. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting for the follow up that just never happened. They just, they put out a live album every other year, that's because that's what they always did. But they just never went back into the studio to do it again. And it's a real shame because, man, Fire in Line, Low Cost, High Cost of Low Living, Desdemona, and a lot of these songs they played live quite a bit in the ensuing years. Woman Across the River, Old Before My Time, Rockin' Horse. I mean, there's some great instrumental stuff on here, loads of guitar, loads of great vocals from Greg as well as Warren, and just, this big Allman Brothers ensemble, 2 guitars, 2 drums, percussion, Greg, it's just, it's great stuff. Love the album cover too, because I'm a big Elephant fan. So I always thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, I just as a last statement, doesn't get much better, and a perfect kind of follow up to those really strong albums they put out in the 90s, which are really amazing for folks who like the Allman Brothers but never really listened to anything past like the mid 70s. You're really missing out on 7 Turns and Up, all the I think it's 4 studio albums they did after the reunion for 1990 and going forward. All fantastic. This might even be my favorite. It's pretty close. So yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, it almost seems like bad business sense that the brand didn't continue on and they had it, because it's not like these people can't write, right? There's enough people to write. There's always projects going on. So you would think they would have somebody would have like cracked the whip and said, look, put your name on another album. However the collective does it, put your name on it, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, 2003. So, these older bands are not selling lots of copies of new records, but but those 90s albums did pretty well for them. And this also did fairly well considering, the climate, right? But yeah, I mean, they still, like I said, they continue to tour year in and year out. And, Warren is always writing material. So I was very surprised they didn't do something else after that. But you know what? That's now that it provides fodder for doing a show like this, right? So it's something to talk about.
Yeah. All right. So my number 1 choice today is what's the right way to hold it up? This one, David Bowie, Black Star. And what a choice for best last albums, because people loved this album. I think it's a great album, and it does remind me of the ramp up in certain ways from the 3 previous albums, right? Heathen and Reality and that one there, The Next Day. And this is the one before it, and recorded, Black Star is recorded, more or less in secret, in a shroud of secrecy. Tony Visconti producing at the Magic Shop in New York. What's amazing about this record is, well, a few things are amazing about it. It was released on his birthday, and then he died 2 days later, right? It was released January 8th, 2016, and then 69th birthday, and he died January 10th from cancer. There's the 2 videos on here that, graphically and really sort of sadly and tragically show, the cancer experience, more or less. But talk about a parting shot and a best last album. He just wanted to put this out, make sure it came out before he died, type thing. And one of the amazing things about it is they just hired like a local New York jazz quintet of more or less unknown guys, and made this music that sounds like almost like a new futuristic sort of music, a little bit of krautrock to it. But using sort of traditional toolings. And there's always these bands that kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of the Smiths and Morrissey and even the likes of Korn in certain ways, where a whole new music can be created of just like guitar, bass, and drums, just the regular tools, yet it doesn't sound like normal, old rock that you heard. Morrissey is in a very, very subtle way that, but you can't describe that music that Morrissey does as new wave or hard rock or dance hall music or whatever. It's just, yeah. And the Smiths was the same way. You had like this acoustic guitar and some electric guitar and some bass and drums and vocals, and yet this is kind of weird. And
Yeah,
this and this
what
David,
is it? Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and this David Bowie album is kind of the same way. It's like you're listening to normal sort of music, but it's coming out like almost like dark dance or trance music, yet it's made with this mostly regular toolings and just odd, very off-putting melodies, very sophisticated, really kind of provocative, odd lyrics. And it moves along nicely. It's not boring at all. Everybody loved it when it came out, but everybody, of course, was in massive mourning for this great artist dying. It sold like 1.9 million copies worldwide. It was a big album. The packaging's really cool, but it's not over the top. I mean, packaging like this could have been even more over the top, but there's a lot of spot varnish on it. You see the reflection there, right? This apparently says Bowie in a very stylized type style, and there's more kind of spot varnishing all over the place on it. But just a really cool album, and talk about a last album situation. I mean, it doesn't get more dramatic than that. My record comes out, and then he dies 2 days later, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about that when it came out, and it's funny because it's not a very immediate David Bowie album, right? It's not an album you put out and instantly go, oh wow, that's really cool. Yeah, the memorable melodies and all that kind of stuff. It touches on avant-garde at times, but that's, I think, is the beauty about it, and speaks leagues about this guy who was always willing to take a chance musically. I mean, you look at his career and he was constantly doing that. I mean, they didn't call him the musical chameleon for nothing, right? And I think that's a perfect example, and a pretty cool album to go out by.
Yeah.
And I have heard from so many David Bowie fans who, like you said, love that album and consider it one of his best.
Yeah. Very cool.
All right. So my last choice of the day, another one of those bands that, kind of like David Bowie, obviously we wish he would have continued on, but we lost him, right? Here's another band who I think they just felt like they went as far as they could and needed to take a break. And then a few years later, we lost the driving force behind the band in Neil Peart. So I'm talking about Clockwork Angels from Rush. I like this album a lot, pretty much a concept record. It's a pretty heavy album. And I think as something to go out on, the two surviving members should be pretty proud of what they did here. And, everybody likes to put Rush in these kind of eras, right? You got the 70s stuff, you got the 80s, and then the 90s and on. And I think this stacks up, if we're going to do the era thing, I think this stacks up pretty well with all of the post 90s albums. I like Snakes and Arrows quite a bit. I like this one even more. I think this is a stronger album. I think this is arguably stronger than a couple of their 90s albums. And it's melodic. It's pretty dense, and the production is as well. And but there's some good memorable tracks on here, like Caravan. The Anarchist is really good. You got the title track is quite good. The Wreckers, Headlong Flight, a lot of really good material on here. It was great to hear them play some of this stuff live. And you just have to wonder. The Garden is another great song on here. You have to wonder if the band had continued on, would some of these tracks have been a regular part of their set list going forward? And, maybe, again, I think because the band ended shortly after this, I somehow think that in the annals of Rush history, that this album is going to get forgotten a little bit. And it's a shame because I think it's a really strong one. So, Clockwork Angels.
Yeah, and it's surprising that it is their first full concept album. And I think the other great thing about that record that people should appreciate is I think Neil's drumming is the grooviest of his career. Like it's the most analog and groovy and not sort of really locked down and studied. He was really pushed to just give her on it, like a lot of bashing around. He feels like there's a lot of circular motion to what he's doing, which matched up with the analog heaviness of most of the songs. It's definitely not a keyboardy feeling album. It
Yeah,
just
no,
feels
not at
like
all.
this trio just giving her, and in a lot of ways there's a the Who-ness to it as well, right? It's just it really feels like that power trio thing that Rush never quite had much Who-ness to them. But this album, it definitely seems very human and analog, and like they're all in a room looking at each other, just bashing it out. So yeah, very cool.
Which is always what we wanted from them, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good point. So there you have it, everybody. Some really cool best last albums, right? From bands that unfortunately that was it. We heard nothing else from them. So Martin, I think we could probably squeeze another episode out of this concept. So
I think so. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
think
because
we
I have
got
a couple
few
that I
more.
didn't use that I'm like, yeah, I'd still like to talk about those, right? So,
Yeah.
so we'll do another episode this probably in about 2 weeks. So stay tuned for that, and all sorts more. Hey, don't touch that dial this week, because Martin and I have another really fun episode coming up for Friday. We're going to talk about albums that revitalized a band's career. So a band who was kind of sputtering along for a bit, maybe even sinking lower than that, and then all of a sudden they came out with a new album that totally like changed their fortunes for, went up north. So yeah, so we've got some good selections for that too. So stay tuned for that. That'll be Friday morning. So Martin, any last words? Books coming out,
No, not in particular. Just martinpopoff.com for anything that happens to still be in print. A lot have gone out of print. I was just I'm going to doing a big revamp of the website, and there's a lot of this book is gone, this book is gone, this book is gone. So anyways, yeah, martinpopoff.com.
Cool. And if you're anybody watching is a Who fan, speaking of the Who, before we're talking about the Who, Martin and I will both be on Steve Keeler's Rock Fantasy Files tonight. I'm not sure if it'll be airing tonight or tomorrow morning, for an episode all about the Who, talking about some of our favorite albums of the Who with Steve Keeler, and I'm not sure who else he has on the show. It's usually a big crew, so we'll see. But that'll be probably, my guess is it'll be airing tomorrow. So check out, that's Steve Keeler's Rock Fantasy Files, or just look up Steve Keeler Rock Fantasy. You'll find his YouTube page. And so what else tonight? Barry Goodrow, former guitarist of Boston, here on the channel tonight, one-on-one with myself. So stay tuned for that, and a whole lot more coming up this week. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. See you all later on.